Hey, Randy Joe here, and this is 1001 Reviews, where I plan on listening to every album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book and reviewing each one. Today we are looking at Nightmare on Wax's 1995 album, Smoker's Delight. And according to the book, Smoker's Delight was released in 1995 under the Warp label, produced by Ease, E-A-S-E, with art direction by Steve Brown, nationality UK, with a running time of 73 minutes and 22 seconds. Now, with Smoker's Delight, I find most of the tracks to be extremely well produced and interesting and catchy beats that are there to prove something. But that doesn't mean that this album is without its flaws, as its formula of repetition and long song lengths can be both a strength for the album or its greatest weakness, as this formula can stretch songs out that have very little to say for long stretches of time with very little change or purpose, some going for more than 6 minutes long. But this formula is also sometimes a great thing, as when it does have a great catchy beat or catchy hook to it, it can be an extremely enjoyable hypnotic-like experience that is something you would play in the background, but not in a negative way. For example, with songs like Stars, Cruise Don't Stop, or Grove Street, this formula ends up paying off in spades. Stars is a extremely groovy and funk-filled track that, over its runtime, you never find yourself looking at how much is left, which is crazy to me considering Stars is actually sandwiched between two tracks, the first being Me and You, and the second being Wait a Minute / Praying for Jeep Beat, and these two tracks actually transition into and out of Stars. And by transitioning into and out of, it actually stretches Stars out from being a 6-minute track into almost being a 10-minute track. And over this 10 minutes, it never feels too long or too overdone, because it is consistently switching up and knowing which beats to play off the longest. Then the song Groove Street, which is by far my favorite of the track list, by far my favorite. You have a super upbeat track with the sample saying "do it" over and over again repetitively over the course of the track, with drum kicks and very heavy reggae funk added to the mix that make this song, Groove Street, hardly ever boring. It's actually quite a moody track as well, which is a nice shift of tone from some of the other tracks on here. Another song that uses this formula to its advantage is Cruise Don't Stop, where once again it is extremely well produced with a much heavier beat added to the mix. And it's definitely one of the most grooviest and funk-filled track and gets your entire body moving. On top of that, it's got this shimmering harp that plays on and off throughout the track that makes it almost transcendent and heaven-like. You find yourself often kind of zoning out and losing yourself with this song, Cruise Don't Stop. And I also really enjoy the sample that keeps saying, "Ooh, Cruise Don't Stop" throughout this track. It's very groovy and super fun to move to. You find yourself just naturally moving with it. Bless My Soul is another one in the same vein of these tracks, where it is repetitive and a very high-tempo funk track, but instead this time splicing in more psychedelic influences. Like I said earlier, however, this formula is somewhat of a double-edged sword, as the worst tracks on here are uninteresting and boring because of this repetitive, long-length structure that is repeated throughout the album. You have songs like Pipe's Honor and Man the Journey that go far longer than it is even necessary to do and end up having very little to say with very insignificant changes in the tracks. The riffs that they choose in these songs to continually play off of are also not as interesting as the other songs on here, and because of this, if you don't have an interesting riff to continually play off of, you just get these boring, uninteresting tracks that have very little to say. Pipe's Honor would actually be a far better track if it was shorter, as this is, I think, the longest one on the album at 9 minutes long. And over the course of the 9 minutes, there is pretty much no change from the first minute as there is in the last minute. So you could skip through the whole thing and you're still getting the exact same song that you'd be getting anywhere else. And the sad part is, like I said, it's not that interesting to begin with. Then the song Mission Venus is a really strange one as well, as Mission Venus feels very much like a basic elevator song that you would hear in a spy video game. This whole theme that it has feels sort of espionage-ish with these funk influences. Doesn't feel all that appealing either. It feels very just one note. And after an hour and 10 minutes, the last song that comes in here, Gambia Vagatter Beach, just feels really tired and bland at this point. Honestly, you listen to it and you find yourself sort of zoning out because you're almost at the end of the album and you kind of just want to rush through it and get to the end. You don't really care anymore, as this album is an hour and a half long. And at this point, you do feel yourself beginning to get quite bored. Even listening to the last track out of the context of the album and just as a singular song, I didn't find it to be all that interesting or intriguing on multiple listens. So overall, what this album does offer is a mix of incredibly well-produced psychedelic, funk, groove, and sometimes techno-infused music that comes together very well and very coherently when it does. And when it doesn't, it just feels too much like a mess of samples. And it really doesn't warrant the long album length that is here. I mean, it is far longer than needed to be. I think if this album lost its weak tracks, especially Mission Venus and Shortened Pipe's Honor, you would have a far better album, and maybe even throw away some of the shorter, more skit-like tracks in here, the ones that just don't offer anything or don't segue into another track. The ones that are just sort of thrown in feel very much like filler tracks. But because it does simply submit to the flaws of the album and it does give in to the weak tracks, it does take quite a hit to the album. So overall, the soft rating of this album for me came in at a 7.2, and I will adjust the rating and harden it to a 7. This is very much just a basic 7 out of a 10 for me. And then finally, is this album essential? Does it really need to be in the 1001 albums to listen to before you die? Do you have to listen to it before you die? I mean, personally, I don't think so. I think I could have gone through life easily and never heard this, and I wouldn't have really cared. Not that I would have known, but still, I'm not grateful or happier for having heard it. I'm just glad I heard just a couple of the tracks on here. But the whole album, I didn't need to hear it at all. So I will say not essential. Definitely not essential, unless, of course, you are a fan of DJing or sample-based music, or you just want something that can play in the background and sort of zone out to, then yeah, this is the album. But otherwise, not essential. Don't need to hear it. That pretty much does it for this video. And if you like this video, then please hit like and subscribe if you want to follow along in listening to all 1001 albums to listen to before you die with me, Randy Joe. And let's see what the next album for us to listen to is. All right, about to press the button. The next album that we have to listen to is number 514, which is 514, Rio by Duran Duran. So Rio, Duran Duran, this Friday will be the review for Noi 75 by Noi. So give Noi a listen if you want to see that review, and also give Rio by Duran Duran a listen for next week's video on Tuesday. This has been Randy Joe, signing off.